Welcome everybody to this first session of the course of Recipe. Let me say a few words to welcome you all. Recipe is a program on a research program funded by the FCDO, by the British government. We are very grateful for their support. It is managed by CEPR, and it is about boosting the productivity of the economy and reducing conflict. So that's the angle of this new program. You also see here the beautiful face of Oliver, who's also very much involved in it. Who is in charge of the outreach activities of this program. So if you belong, for example, to an international organization, NGO, government, or another institution and are interested in teaming up with us, please send an email to Oliver and me. So that would be super. Yeah, Recipe works a bit like Stag and Pedal. We do funding calls and fund a variety of projects. So the starting date is not quite set yet when exactly we have the first call. We also do workshops and outreach and teaching activities like this course here. And so the course is really designed in a way that it is useful for people as a primer if you've never seen much about the economics of conflict, but also for people who know already quite a bit about this literature and want to see where the frontier is in different fields. So we are organized in a way that together with Oliver and me, we have 9 different themes and 2 leaders per theme. So we're like a team of 20 people in charge of this program. And today is the introduction, where what I will cover will be a bit like the basic theoretical models for explaining conflict, and then I swiftly shift to also the overview of the empirical bits and pieces of how this all fits in, and also these 9 themes, which are the 9 big topics of Recipe, how you can think of them together in one kind of framework, if you like. And so this will set the stage for then the next 9 lectures, which are on each theme. So we have themes, like from institutions to investment to peacekeeping to climate change to gender. So a variety of topics that we cover. And so let's maybe all get started. Yeah. So let me share my slides. What you hear in the background is the cat who meows. So yeah, sorry for that. Yes. So let me start at the beginning. Yeah. So now you should see the starting slide, title page. Is that okay, Oliver? Okay. Very good. So key concepts for economies in conflict and fragile settings. Why should we care about conflict? Well, this has become sadly easier as a motivation now in the last few years. 5 years ago, when we presented something about conflict, people were saying this is not economics. But now, as we see in the sad times in which we live, conflict is a bit everywhere, and it explains quite a lot of what's going on in economies around the world. So here, what you see is just to set the stage with some very simple statistic coming from UCDP. UCDP Uppsala is kind of a big center for the collection of conflict data. And you see, it's small print, sadly, but it starts in 1946, this graph, and it's like up to 2021, and the last 3 years are kind of similar. And so what you see is that in different colors, different types of conflict. At the very beginning, after World War II, you had a lot of so-called extra-state conflicts, which were which were conflicts about decolonization and independence. They went down after some decades, and you have in dark blue the interstate wars, which have been quite few, relatively speaking, in the last few decades. And I think one of the reasons why there were few is that we had a rule-based international order with the sovereignty and borders of states being guaranteed. And so you see, well, this may sadly change. Let's see what happens in the coming years. And then you have a category of conflict which is interstate wars, so civil wars, and internationalized civil wars. So if a war between states in the dark blue would be the Falklands War, for example. A pure civil war could be in Sudan, for example, and the internationalized civil war would be like the Congo War, the Second Congo War, where various other neighboring countries were involved as well. And what you see in the last few years, unfortunately, the number of conflicts have gone up to now, for several years, more than 50 conflicts every year. So a quarter of countries are in conflict. Many of these conflicts, like for example the one in Central African Republic, are completely ignored by the media. So you have a few people studying them, but the wide public awareness of this conflict is very small. And so that's also one of the goals of this course, is to kind of bring this to the light. So that's kind of how it looks in terms of the evolution of conflict, with a lot of civil wars and internationalized civil wars that took off in the last few years. Now, so which brings me to already kind of distinguishing different types of conflict. And so, well, one type of conflict is one-sided violence, mass killings. So that would, for example, be what happened with the Red Khmer in Cambodia some decades ago. So that would be where basically you have a helpless civilian population and it's the government attacking its own people. That's one-sided violence. Then what you've seen in the last slide, this graphic was on two-sided violence, where at least 10% of fatalities happen on either side of the battle. And then when you look at two-sided violence, basically you have two categories. One is civil conflict and civil war. The difference is that conflict is kind of smaller magnitude events. And when we talk about civil war, it's like events with more than 1,000 fatalities. And then on the other side, you have interstate disputes and interstate wars, which are about between states. Now Ukraine, Russia, for example. So this is kind of to set the the typology of different types of conflict. We will talk in this course quite a bit about civil conflict and civil wars, because in the last in the last 50 years, this has been the dominant type of conflict. And so, given that, well, we are interested in doing statistics, it's easier to do statistics with cases where you have a lot of observations, and so basically. For this kind of dominant type of conflict, most of the studies have focused on that. But now, of course, we witnessed the kind of comeback of interstate wars, and this has not naturally also implications where now the geoeconomics research agenda takes off and studies these types of conflict. Yeah. So and we also have one of the themes is exactly on geoeconomics. Sorry. I have yeah, sorry. I have some technical problem. Yeah. Um, just a 15 seconds break. Okay. Yeah, well, very good. Yeah, so sorry for this. I had a problem with my cable. So I didn't have electricity and I was scared that at some point the computer would just stop. Okay, so what are the consequences of conflict? Well, one is fatalities. So first of all, of course, conflicts, they cost a lot of human lives. And that's the first reason why we should care. So even cold-hearted economists should care about this, and we do. And by the way, among the team leaders, we have also several non-economists. So when I talk economists, the majority of the people in the group are economists, but we have a very substantial part of as well of non-economists. Um, so, according to some very conservative estimates, you have more than 100 million people who have died just from one-sided violence. So just one of these categories since 1900. So huge numbers. And usually when you look at the number of fatalities, if you take into account the indirect effect, for example, the Spanish flu in the First World War, you can double the numbers. So as many people die indirectly from weakening of health systems, or then directly through bullets in the battlefield. Now, of course, beyond purely the humanitarian suffering, there is also a big economic toll, and there. I can quote many studies, but one recently by Müller and Tobias. Hannes Müller is also one of the team leaders. They find an 18% drop of GDP. So almost a fifth of GDP is gone in a civil war. And the recovery is extremely slow. So the recovery will take many decades, and even after 10 years, the recovery is very impartial. So has a very big impact. And when you look at the 50 poorest countries in the world, almost all of them have had major conflicts in the last few years. So, of course, the causality goes both directions, from causality to conflict and from conflict to causality. But clearly, it's unthinkable to think about development economics without thinking about conflict. There's also a lot of micro-evidence or plenty of studies that are quoted. By the way, one thing I should mention is that we will have a special issue of economic policy where first Oliver and I have a synthesis chapter, and then the different themes each contribute one chapter to this special issue. So one article each in economic policy coming out exactly on these topics. So there you will have the whole literature review in much more detail. Then beyond the economic direct costs, there are also big costs in human capital. So most papers would estimate like 1 year of schooling at least being lost in conflict. And this haunts people later on for whole their life. So for the whole of their life, they will be much less productive, have lower outside options, and are kind of drawn into a vicious cycle. Social capital as well gets deployed. So there is a literature on that as well, where you see many studies find that trust and trust in different communities will be depleted when there is conflict. And this leads to war traps, because what happens basically is that war today destroys trust in the other group, and then less trust in the other group will lead to less interaction, and this less interaction then makes conflict again more likely. And so you have this vicious cycle. So through trust, so conflicts destroy trust. Less trust will make conflict more likely. Through poverty, conflict makes a country poorer, and when a country is poorer, as has been shown by many studies, the risk of conflict again goes up. For education, it's the same. Conflict destroys years of schooling, and when there's less education, again, people have less outside options, less productivity, and conflict is more likely. So again, you see, you have these vicious cycles, which brings me to this quote of Abraham Lincoln with the potential of lasting change. So those who shall have tasted actual freedom, I believe, can never be slaves or quasi-slaves again. So if we can build sustainable peace, inclusive, where people have democracy and a sane mode of government, then in this kind of situation, you build up democratic capital, as shown in recent studies by Besley Person, Acemoglu, and others, uh, where you see that this builds kind of the solid fundamentals for the next generation of peace. However, if a country is in war today and we don't intervene, then this already sows the seeds for the next conflict. And so, in that sense, there is a peace multiplier. What we invest in peace today will bear fruits not just today, but also tomorrow. While if we neglect it and we don't care, then the conflict today will lead to a war trap and will also make conflict tomorrow more likely. So now I start with two very simple models, simple kind of frameworks to kind of fix ideas and see where different conflict results fit in. I'll keep it very simple, and the slides are also available, of course. And so the goal is to help you then to have kind of a mental map of how different bits and pieces fit together. I'll be rather quick. So if you're a bit fed up, then please write in the chat that you're fed up, and then Oliver will tell me, and I will be a bit quicker on the theory, and then we go back to empirics. So even if you don't like theory, you shall, it's a short moment, but it's very helpful because it guides the empirics afterwards. So the poster child of political scientists. Political scientists, overall, one can generalize a bit, have as a dominant framework war as bargaining failure. And that's kind of, it starts from the war inefficiency puzzle, and it asks the question, well, why the hell are wars actually taking place? So it's a deep question, because in general, if we have a dispute with somebody, imagine you're in a university, and you have a dispute with a colleague about how to use your joint research budget. Rather than kind of starting to hit you, you will kind of cut the compromise. You'll say, well, 50-50, or some other split, or the same at the workplace. And so in general, you would expect that, given that conflict destroys a lot, 20% of GDP almost, you would in principle expect a peaceful settlement, a bargain, a deal between the groups in order to avoid the killing and the destruction. And so the very deep question is, why doesn't it happen? And so here I will talk about these reasons for bargaining failure, as summarized in a very famous article, a workhorse model of James Fearon from 95 in IO, in International Organization, top journal in political science. So basically the idea is we have two states, A and B. They have preferences over a set of issues in some interval between 0 and 1. And so that could be the control of some region, or some oil field, for example, or some mine. A wants something close to 1, B wants something close to 0. So the territorial division of a border, of a border region. We have the utility functions, where basically the more you get of the whole thing, the better off you are. So UA will be increasing in X, and UB will be increasing 1 minus X. So B wants something close to 0, and A wants something close to 1. You can, for simplicity, let's say that we normalize the getting 0 to a utility of 0, and getting 1 a utility of 1. And if there is a war, A prevails with some probability P. And then, of course, that could be 50%, 30%, 70%, whatever. And so war, however, is a costly lottery. So war will kind of destroy much. And so the whole cake will be smaller. So if you fight over 100 kilos of gold, well, 20 kilos will be destroyed in the fight, and what remains to be shared is only 80. And so then you can, write down very easily the expected utilities of conflict for each player, which is with some probability P, they win. With probability 1 minus P, they get the bad outcome, and they have to pay anyway the cost of conflict, both of them, which means that their expected utilities are P minus CA and 1 minus P minus CB. And as war is costly, this creates some peace dividend, some zone in the middle where actually both are better off accepting such a deal rather than fighting. And you see this graphically here, and that's the bargaining range. And so, if there is, if there is conflict, what I would get as if I'm A is just this thing here. What B would get is this thing here. And so all this whole thing in the middle, the bargaining range, all of this would be destroyed in conflict. And so this creates a huge opportunity to find a settlement. Any kind of deal that would be either, 50-50 or 40-60 or 60-40, anything that is somewhere here in this bargaining range would be an acceptable settlement that both would prefer over going to war. And so now the big $1 million question is why the hell sometimes bargaining fails and sometimes we cannot reach a deal. And so James Fearon, in his seminal piece, summarizes a synthesis of what are the most common reasons why bargaining can fail. And so that's kind of a very, fundamental stepping stone for a whole series of economic models and political science models. Well, first of all, there is private information. So A and B, they may have different estimates of P. If I think that my winning chances are 80% and you think that my winning chances are just 20%, well, our estimates of P are so far apart that this can completely, crowd out the whole bargaining range. And so if you have very different ideas about what the winning chances are, then we may not find a bargain. And of course, then you could say, well, but why don't they just transmit proofs of their knowledge so that they can kind of reveal this fog of war, this kind of uncertainty? But of course you don't do, right? In conflict, once the adversary knows the exact position and the exact numbers of tanks and planes, etc., that you have, well, you're on the losing side. So secrecy is actually helpful to win wars. And so that's why transmitting actual proof of military strength is typically not feasible or not enacted. So that's the first kind of big reason for bargaining failure is private information. There's a second one that would be risk-loving players. Some players like to gamble. So that would be a second reason. So they even overall, if on average they lose, some players kind of like to take risks. So for example, if you're a very unpopular president of a country and you've been doing very poorly economically, well, by starting some war, maybe that could help you to stay in power. So that's why they may take this risky bet. Then other types of bargaining failures. One is issue indivisibilities. So if not all outcomes are technically feasible to indivisibilities, bargaining can fail. So oil fields may not be easy to divide. Or if you have a city that is really important for different conflict parties, well, it's not always easy to cut a city in two. So this issue indivisibilities is another major reason. Another reason would be psychological gains from war, where if hatred is very deep, then maybe groups hate each other so much that some kind of irrational psychological gains of war would push them towards conflict despite the costs of war. That's another reason for bargaining. And then another very, very big reason for bargaining are commitment problems. Commitment problems is basically that you cannot credibly promise. And that's when we talk about peace agreements today in various conflicts. That's, I mean, if you read the news today, half of the discussions are about commitment problem. How can you be sure that once a peace deal has been closed, that there is that party would not renege on the deal and then still attack? And so there are different types of commitment problems that have received a lot of attention in the literature. One is first strike advantage. First strike advantage is the element of surprise. And you know, Hannibal or Napoleon or George Washington or have in history, there are famous episodes where they kind of used this first strike advantage, where basically they took a route that was not expected, and so they could surprise the adversary. And so a first strike, in terms of our model, a first strike advantage, what it does, it creates a wedge between the likelihood of winning if you attack first and the likelihood if you attack second. And if this wedge between PF and PS, first and second striker winning probabilities, is very big, then this may crowd out actually the whole bargaining range. And so in that case, a first strike advantage would make it attractive for a player to renege on promises. A second one would be preventive war. So if, for example, A's winning chances increase over time. So we've seen in history very often conflicts have started when there was one kind of superpower on the decline, and there was like the runner-up, the second power in the world, who would kind of be gaining steam. And at that point, sometimes conflicts have taken place where the superpower has made the judgment of saying, well, we're kind of, time is not on our side. If we attack now, we can still win, while if we attack later, we may lose. So there are some historical examples where these kind of preventive wars have taken place. So I guess, you know, of course we prefer no war at all, but this just, you know, historically has sometimes taken place. Strategic territory. So that it's sometimes called king on the hill. So where basically if the object you fight over give you higher chances to win in the future, if you have two groups who fight over the control of some heights, of some hill or some territory that makes them more powerful in the future, and you cannot credibly promise to not exploit this advantage later on, well, in that situation, actually, you can have, again, incentives to renege on your promises. Then there is another and last here in this list type of source of bargaining failure, and that's political bias. And so if conflict is kind of costly for the society as a whole, well, it may actually be less costly for the leaders. So if the leaders are kind of corrupt autocratic leaders and they can kind of gain a lot of the spoils of war, but they shield their kind of elite and junta and family from bearing any costs, and only some poor people from peripheral areas will be drafted into the war. Well, in that case, the conflict may be in the interest of the leader, but not of its people. And so political bias could then explain why leaders start wars that are not in the interest of its population. Now, of course, the first question comes to mind is, well, but then maybe democracy can help. Yes. So there's a very strong result in the literature, and it's called it's called democratic peace. And democratic peace is sometimes called the only hard law of social science because the stylized fact is particularly strong. It's extremely rare that a democratic country attacks another democratic country. You have wars between democracies and autocracies, between autocracies and autocracies, but a democracy, like a functioning real democracy attacking another democracy, is almost never heard of. And so, which means that the solution to reduce drastically the number of interstate wars would be to increase the number of democracies in the international system. There is a very interesting study by Owen McGurk from Tufts University, who's also one of the theme leaders here of the recipe program. And he has a paper called No Kin in the Game. And what he looks at is voting patterns of US members of parliament, of Congress, so senators or people who belong to the House of Representatives. And in this paper of Ian McGurk and Coulters, what they do is they compare the voting records of people who, for wars with a general draft, of members of parliament that have an 18-year-old son who could be drafted to war versus an 18-year-old daughter who in these wars was not draftable, which means that the comparison is statistically very convincing. What they do is they compare cases of people with the same number of kids, kids of the same age, same chamber of parliament, everything the same. The only difference is that one has a kid that can be drafted to go to war and the other not. And what they find is that if your own kid could be drafted to go for war, well, your legislative voting record is much more conservative and much more careful in terms of avoiding escalation of war. So, which is already the mechanism that is well highlighted in democracies. If your own kid will have to go and fight and maybe die, you are much less likely to start some stupid war and invade some other country. So, yeah, so that's the first kind of setting, very popular in political science. Then there's a second setting, war as rent seeking. And that starts a bit from the economics, public choice kind of literature. And this is asking more like the question of saying, well, okay, well, there will always be some level of conflict. Now let's look at the intensity or duration of conflict. And so this kind of setting works with so-called contest success functions. And so basically, it's about some price, something you want to steal. So that could be the control of the state, control of some oil field, some mineral resources, etc. And you have some time constraint where either you fight or you work. Working gives you a salary. So the higher your salary, of course, the higher your outside option, your opportunity cost of conflict. And so your payoff function will be the likelihood of winning some prize plus the salary you earn when you work. And so if the more you fight, the less you work. So you have an opportunity cost of going to fight. And that's what you see, by the way, also with rebel soldiers. It's a job, it's a career. Rebels get paid. It's not like Che Guevara, idealist on the T-shirts that you see with his charisma. In reality, reality is more grim. You have a warlord trying to find funding, for example, from mineral mines, to then hire people, and the rebel soldiers are typically, in majority of cases, guns for hire, if you like. So which is illustrated exactly by this payoff function. So you basically have, again, also for the second group, the payoff function is composed by the likelihood of winning something, some prize R, plus then the salary of non-fighting, and which gets reduced if you fight more. Then the likelihood of winning is expressed by a contest success function, which is basically my fighting effort over the fighting effort of both. So if Oliver and I fight over some research budget, then my share that I will get is my fighting effort divided by the fighting effort of Oliver plus my fighting effort. And then you can also build in some fighting technology or some other bells and whistles, but that's kind of the main idea. So once we put this in, then you end up with some, it's like a Cournot game, if you like. You find a Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium is the best reply to the other's best reply. It's the intersection of the reaction functions here. If you want to learn more about these models, Kai Conrad has written a fantastic book called Strategy in Contests that would kind of explain this in much depth. And so if you take exactly this model here, so you just plug in this contest success function here into the payoff functions and you solve it, well, you get these reaction functions, which are just the first order conditions. You have these reaction functions and they would kind of create one single stable equilibrium here. There's also an unstable equilibrium at 0, 0, but the one we focus on is the stable equilibrium here. And so that would be kind of the level of fighting that you see in this setting. Well, here I'll skip the maths. You can have a look at the slides afterwards if you want. But so you get the Nash equilibrium, and these are the equilibrium fighting efforts. What you see is that the higher the price, the more oil you can grab, the more they fight. And at the same time, if you have higher wages would reduce the level of fighting. So that's another key implication. And then you can calculate the waste, the equilibrium fighting levels, etc. You can calculate all of that, but here we skip this. And so the main thing that's really most important, because here the goal is really that you've heard about this model, because that helps you then also to read up on cutting edge research today. Well, the first thing is that you see that in terms of comparative statics, the larger the price, so the higher the oil, the more you fight, and the higher the opportunity cost, so the higher the salaries, the less you fight. And that will already give you a good idea of factors that can be really important for policy. Then you have some very famous result, the Hirschleifer's paradox of power. And this can explain some surprise victory in world history. So the Bolsheviks in Russia in 1917, they were military not very strong, and they still won. For example, Fidel Castro in Cuba, 59, was also kind of a surprise victory. One of the things that can explain these things is basically that what you see is that actually, if they have the same fighting technology and one player is the underdog with a lower salary, well, the one with the lower salary will fight harder because it has a lower opportunity cost and has a higher winning chance. And that can also explain why, the Soviets in Afghanistan, for example, failed and lost. And so you have a situation where actually a group being weaker, having a lower salary, they may have a higher tendency to fight because the opportunity cost is lower. And for that reason, they may have higher winning chances. This is a famous result. It's not necessarily very robust, because you can have also settings where, for example, GDP would also be a kind of a part of the fighting technology. So if you are richer, that also helps you get a better fighting technology. So it's a bit more complex than that, but I still want to make you aware of this very famous finding of Hirschleifer. So then, so that was kind of the second theoretical fundamental. Now let's link the theory to empirics. So what have we learned in terms of key factors? Well, first of all, we see that democracy is a really important thing. So democracy, well, one thing to illustrate why democracy may be so fundamental is if you look at the evolution of the last 12 years. So if you look at democracy scores from Freedom House, from Polity4, from VDAM, from the Economist Intelligence Unit, you name it. You take any democracy scores and you calculate the global average around the world, what you will see, unfortunately, is in the last dozen years, democracy went down on average around the world. More countries shift towards autocracy away from democracy than the other way around. And at the same time, we are at record levels of conflict. In the last 5 years, every year, more than 50 conflicts in the world, a quarter of the countries in conflict, as you've seen graphically before. Well, there's a link. It's a correlation, but actually there's also causality. I have some slides on that if you like. But I talk too much and I'm too slow, and so I probably won't have time to show these slides. But democracy in this setting that we've just seen would kind of mean a lower R, because well, take Switzerland for example. Switzerland, we have the government. It's a coalition government with 7 ministers with a rotating presidency every year, and the composition of this has been unchanged for decades. And we have basically the same 4 party that are making up the Swiss government as decades and decades ago. And so this means that in Switzerland, when you have an election, the stakes of the election are extremely low. Whether you lose a bit the election or you win a bit the election, well, you still have access to power. You have a proportional representation. You have a direct democratic votes. In such a setting, what you gain from kind of fighting for power is really dismal. So have a very low R, because everybody has guaranteed some stake in power, and groups are included. And so that's about democracy. Then a second policy that's really important is work. Good economic perspectives, because that leads to a higher opportunity cost of fighting, which leads to a higher salary through a higher salary. So a higher salary, if you invest in the economy, is exactly something that would reduce conflict. And that's in the DNA, that's in the spirit of this recipe program, which comes from the development economics part of FCDO. And so the idea is really to boost at the same time people livelihoods and reduce conflict. And then there's a third thing that I wanted to highlight is warranties, security guarantees, which mean that they raise the unit cost of fighting. If you extend the model slightly, and you have UN Blue Helmets, for example, one of the specialists on the question, Lisa Hultmann, is also one of the theme leaders. Well, if you have these security guarantees, this would raise the unit cost of fighting, and would in this setting, again in extended setting, also lead to less conflict. And you get similar comparative statistics if you focus on bargaining failure instead. So taking these 3 factors, I've written some popular science book that I shamelessly advertise here as well. I'm sorry for this marketing. But basically, the book is called The Peace Formula, Voice, Work, and Warranties. And basically, voice is exactly about the democracy, work is exactly about the economy, and warranties is exactly about security guarantees. The book is written in a very accessible way. So it's written as a popular science book, very easy read, no jargon, no technicalities, but it has a long appendix where basically you have all the detailed underlying studies that are quoted in detail. And here is the bookshop in beautiful Cambridge, headquarter of Cambridge University Press, where it was published. So yeah, so this is just to kind of summarize these 3 factors. Then I have to skip a lot of slides just because of sheer running out of time because I'm so chatty. But if I have time, I'll go happily back to these slides. These are basically slides on looking at specific studies on boosting productivity and wages, on democracy as kind of a big force for reducing conflict, and about state capacity as well, and security guarantees. Now, what I wanted to talk more about, because it's very much linked to the recipe and the next 9 lectures, because I mean, I'm supposed here, I'm not supposed to be here to chat loosely about things in all kinds of directions. I'm actually supposed to set the stage also for these 9 next lectures with the themes. So, if you look at one of the reasons, I mean, FCDO, who sponsors this program, FCDO is of course not located in a country where there is conflict. So there's no civil war in Britain, thankfully, right? And so the point of view that we take is that what can we as scholars around the world in peaceful or in countries in conflict, or also the British FCDO from the outside, what can we do to help all countries in the world to make the world a better place? And one thing, by the way, that I didn't mention before is that one of our vocations here that we have with this program is also to go beyond the ivory tower of just people in rich countries, in famous universities, sitting there and giving advice to the rest of the world. So that's not the goal. So that's why we were going to also do a lot of workshops around the world in a variety of places, not just in the most famous universities. And it's also planned that some of the calls for funding would also be directed to specific areas of the world. So the idea is really to be as inclusive and open to everybody. So if the next Alfred Einstein or Alfredine Einstein comes from any country in the world, this person, she or he, should have a chance to make a really big difference, and that's one of the goals of this program. So to say that, it's like the view of what can we do about this, no matter where we are located, not necessarily if you're the president of a conflict-torn country. And for that, I have written some Journal of Economic Literature survey published last year. I talked about 3 big factors: mediation, where countries like, for example, Norway, Switzerland have played a really big role. They've been very overrepresented in terms of mediation cases, with the International Geneva playing a really big role. Second one, military. Military aid often backfires, so that there has been a big literature on that. But UN peacekeeping troops make a really positive difference. And also money. Talking about money, that would be exactly the kind of economic policies that I also hinted at before. So when we have these 3 factors, they of course are very wide. So these are just kind of 3 labels on a very rich type of factors. We can express this graphically. And so this kind of, reveals that I've spent, 12 years in a business school, where basically it's the kind of graphs that management scholars love. You see a bit less in economics, but so here basically these three big factors: mediation, military options, and money are here at the core of outside interventions to end conflict. They would typically address risk factors here to the left in orange, so outside interventions in green, risk factors in orange, and then factors that matter for peace agreements in blue. What are these numbers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Why are they 9 numbers? Yes, these are the 9 themes. You got it. So basically, the various 9 themes of the recipe program, they would all fit into the different kind of factors that you here see graphically. So staring at this graph kind of gives you some introduction and setting the stage of what is to come in the other 9 lectures of this first recipe, online course. By the way, if the course is a success and if people like it, it's very likely that we're gonna do some other then some more specialized further kind of lectures. I think we're all very committed to this, and if it's useful, we are very, very happy to do more of that. So, risk factors. This comes back to what you've seen at the beginning, the bargaining failure model, asymmetric information, commitment problems, low opportunity cost of conflict. So these are exactly the theory-driven factors, and that's the thing that you also see in plenty of studies. Yeah, so these are risk factors. They can be addressed by exactly this outside intervention, mediation, which is theme 8 in our recipe program. Then military options like UN blue helmets, etc. Then all kinds of economic policies, public policy programs to boost the economy, private investment to boost the economy, a variety of other factors, and so that's the third factor, money. These things together help to end conflict. But then you need some peace agreement. What helps for peace agreement? Well, what helps for peace agreement are all things linked to power sharing, democracy, checks and balances, giving people a voice. And that's exactly here in blue, these kind of factors. Security guarantees, warranties is also here in blue. And these things, together with ending conflict, they can secure a lasting peace. The lasting peace can help combat poverty, improving the performance in the economy, which is also a part of this recipe program. And a better economy, of course, helps to keep peace sustainable. So that's how all of this fits together. So yeah, that's kind of this overview. What can we do? Well, there's a role for all of us. JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And here I have another graph that looks very much with like management scholar style. And that's kind of making the point that what we need is some kind of smart idealism. So you have on one axis altruism, where people care about other things than just, stealing as much money as you can and giving it to your family. And evidence-based is on the y-axis, where actually, well, you want to be scientific and care about the evidence. And in this space, the sweet spot is you want to be both evidence-based and altruistic. That is what I call smart idealism. In the book, I also talk quite a bit about this concept. If you only have one, if you're only altruistic, but you're kind of ignoring evidence because you're so focused on something, well, you become a dangerous ideologue, where you think, oh, I make my country, I help improve my country, but you ignore evidence, and what you do may backfire completely, and you may completely destroy your country, despite the fact that you believe you're doing something good. And then there are the kleptocrats in blue, on the other side of the spectrum, where some of the kleptocrats may be evidence-based and smart. So some dictators held several PhDs, but they couldn't care less about common people. They're just here in for stealing and securing shopping trips to Paris and Milano with the private jet of the country. And then, of course, you have the combination of people who are neither altruistic nor evidence-based, and that's of course even worse. Yeah. So to conclude, so some of these factors I haven't kind of had time to cover, but I just still kind of want to talk about it because there is evidence on exactly that. So what shall we do in terms of policies? Well, one is green energy transition, because what you see later on in this course is that oil, fossil fuels, dirty energy are main determinants of conflict, And actually, by kind of getting away from the petrostates, who then also tend to be aggressive with other countries, you can foster peace directly. And in addition, climate change is also a major risk factor. So I have a paper with two co-authors, Eberle and Tönig, Heat and Hate, for example, where we show that, and many other people have worked on that. So Nan Nan McGurk and Miguel and co-authors. So it's a big literature on basically that climate change is a big risk factor. So by getting out of fossil fuels the fast as we can not only save our planet, but in terms of environment, but also save peace. Second, democracy, democracy, democracy. Democracy worldwide, checks and balances. We see in a variety of countries around the world varying tendencies. Even in a democracy, some people who get elected may do very dangerous stuff. So what we need is robust democracy with checks and balances to make sure that nobody can hollow it out. And there's a huge evidence, again, the theme is on democracy. You will hear about this more in this course, that democracy fuels mass killings, democracy fuels civil wars, democracy fuels corruption. No, the other way around, of course. Democracy reduces the risk of mass killings. Democracy reduces the risk of civil wars. Democracy reduces the risk of interstate wars, and democracy reduces corruption. So it's autocracy that fuels all these bad outcomes. Then it's better to invest in human capital accumulation through education and health policies rather than in just distributing cash in an uncoordinated way. So you will hear about that as well in the course. There is some subtle evidence on when does foreign aid and direct transfers, when is it something that helps for peace and when not. It depends on the devil is in the detail, basically. Mediation may work, but we need more research on that because basically many of the studies with mediation, they fight with the difference between correlation and causality because, of course, mediation is driven by self-selection and it's not easy to have exogenous driver of mediation. So that's UN peacekeeping troops are really important. Then trade is a force of good, so which is also important nowadays, where basically there is quite some solid evidence. So we're going to talk about that in the course, and also my Lausanne colleague Matthias Tönig has written a very great handbook chapter on trade and conflict. So I would also strongly recommend that. And there is a big role also for building trust and fostering reconciliation and cooperation. That's another kind of big thing to consider. And then, well, one thing I haven't here on the slide, but there are plenty of multilateral policies like transparency initiatives, traceability, etc., that make a huge difference. So there's a big role for international coordination. And so everything related to multilateralism and the rule-based international order is also a big boost for peace. Yes, to conclude with the last slide, and then we go to the questions, the stakes are really high. And let me finish with this quote of Albert Einstein. I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. So if we don't succeed in building peace, we may be witnessing a big regression of humanity. Thank you for your attention. I guess given that we've run a bit over time, maybe it's the natural moment to stop, right, Oliver?
No, I think so. But we want to advertise the next session, which we have the slide here now. So that will be next week, same time. We promise to improve potentially a bit on time management, we really invite you and welcome you to participate in, in, in that lecture as well.
Thanks so much. Great to have you on board. Looking forward to continuing on this journey.